Welcome to this week's webinar. I'm Ryan Brown, a lead recruiter here at Hirewell, joined by my colleague Don Effler. It's also a lead recruiter here at Hirewell. Today we want to talk about how to attack your job search like a salesperson. So we want to talk about the $1 million question, which is really figuring out where you want to work. And that can sometimes be a bit of a daunting task to uncover. So we want to share tips and tricks in terms of narrowing this down. So we believe in treating your job search like a sales funnel. You have to start with a ton of opportunities at the top, so sometimes hundreds, to get to a few offers at the bottom. And one of the best ways to do this is by creating a target companies list. So today we want to discuss why you should think like a salesperson, what a target companies list even is, why you should create one, how to create it, and how to use it once you do. So with that, let's go ahead and kick things off into today's webinar. So Don, you want to get us started?
Sure, absolutely. So, I think the big thing to, with kind of this topic to start off with is, we're going to approach this from the idea of a salesperson, but like, why a salesperson? And like, how does that even relate to job searching, right? I think that a lot of people, when they think of job searching, and if they were to compare that to any industry or profession, it'd be to like a marketer, right? How do I brand myself? How does my resume look? How do I reflect upon the people that are potentially looking at me? But, that's a very, that approach is important. And we, here at Hirewell go into a lot of stuff about how to do that appropriately. But, especially if you're in a certain situation, like your resume could look good, you could be able to speak about certain things correctly and have that marketing mindset. But if you're in a situation where you need a job or need to start looking or, really hate your position, you have to be more proactive. And that's not necessarily as focused as, just having that marketing mindset, right? You need to have kind of a different mindset, a proactive mindset to kind of attack the market kind of from that perspective. So, we'll explain a little bit about kind of what we mean by like, attacking the job search as a salesperson. But like, again, to kind of go back to the question, why think like a salesperson and kind of from the beginning. So, I'm sure, Ryan, you might have some kind of thoughts on this too, but like, before I kind of got into a career that involved sales, my idea of a salesperson was like a used car salesman from like a
100%.
comedy movie, right? Like cheesy suit, right? And like kind of the gift of gab sort of thing where it was just a talker and convinced you and kind of almost tricked you into buying a car you didn't want or something like that, right?
Totally.
But like, once I kind of got into a career in sales and, did a little bit more, there's obviously like so much more to sales than the pitch or someone with that kind of, like I said, I'll use it again, gift of gab, right? And you realize kind of how sales is involved in every single company, right? Besides the used car salesman, there's corporate sales, there's financial sales, there's, obviously like online retailers do different kinds of sales, right? The ads that you get, for, swim trunks on your Instagram, like there's a salesperson and a marketing person kind of behind that that's driving that kind of outreach. So sales is really in, any kind of, except for like maybe healthcare, right? And even in healthcare, there's quite a bit of sales, but like, sales is really in kind of every industry that you can think of, right? And there's a common theme amongst all those salespeople across all those industries, and it's the numbers game that they approach their potential clients, right? It's not about that used carsman sales pitch. Let me get you. What do I need to get you in this car today? Attitude. It's a methodical process that leads to success upon a lot of hard work, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about. So, to like kind of summarize, like, again, not being about the pitch, but the numbers game, which we'll kind of go into. And like, when you think about the numbers game in sales, like that might not be so obvious, but think about Salesforce, right? Salesforce is one of the top technology companies in the world, as obviously the country, but what Salesforce is a CRM or a client relationship management software, right? All it does is track sales data and sales information. And it is massive and hugely customizable. But it's necessary for companies to use something like a Salesforce to manage all this amount of numbers and data and to essentially like funnel that in the correct way, right? So, I think the biggest part is that it filters the correct data, to, especially when you're talking about like companies and potential clients, you want to get kind of the less desirable kind of clients out there and focus on what's kind of best for you. So any salesperson will tell you that, while the pitch is important, it's identifying those correct clients. And once you do that pitch to a correct client, you'll have that much kind of more work kind of associated with it, right? So, and obviously that can like be in a lot of different situations, right? So I kind of thought of an example of something like that. It might be like, a housing realtor, right? They're in sales, their total target, right, is anyone in kind of the area that they service. But, that's hundreds, potentially hundreds of thousands of people. And what they do is manage kind of the relationships with those people, make sure that they understand kind of timing and things like that. So maybe they reach out to someone in 6 to 7 years after they sold them a house to see if they're ready for another one. And it's that kind of management of these individuals that, helps them kind of succeed. But I don't know, Ryan, like, can you think of any kind of like other examples where like why that's kind of like important to manage kind of numbers and things like that?
Yeah. So I think if we're like kind of bringing it back into, thinking like a salesperson and why it's important to do so for your job search, it's because it is a numbers game, right? Like you have to start off with a number of job applicants to get down to maybe a handful of offers. And so you want to start to identify and think like a salesperson in terms of, okay, what are going to be the most desirable companies for me to reach out to and identify and target for my next role? And how do I make a more effective pitch for myself as a potential employee to make it seem like I may be the right fit for this next role? So taking those ideas as a salesperson and putting that into your job search is going to be really important moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that kind of leads into the next slide, which is kind of like about the numbers, right? And actually what salespeople do and kind of what Ryan was talking about, but that kind of funnel, right? So as it relates to sales and how we can kind of relate that to our job search, all starts with, especially with that like realtor example, identifying the list of potential clients and potential sales opportunities. In our case, that is going to be potential employers that we may want to hire, right? And if you think about it, like, there are a lot of potential employers out there, but they aren't necessarily for you. So it's about kind of filtering them down, right? So, obviously we can, we'll kind of go into it, but we can apply a lot of kind of concepts as to identify which of those potential employers are good for us and kind of filter those down. And the next is, also important, but it's about managing that list and those multiple and potentially thousands and thousands of contacts, in our case, potential employers, over time to essentially ensure that we, reach the optimal customer at the right moment, or the right employer at the right moment, increasing that we're going to get a job, right? We may interview with a company, love them, and maybe they go with someone else, or, the role closes, but, it's about maintaining that over time, where we realize in 6 months, if we maintain that relationship, that might be something we can re-explore. But if you're not managing that in any mind, like, you're going to forget about that you had 6 months, a year, 2 years ago. And that's exactly what happens in sales too, right? If you hear no one day, you ask the same question and make the same pitch 6 months later, you may get it then, just like a job. But it's not just about kind of, you have one shot and you miss it. It's about managing it over time. And then lastly, this list will also help us eliminate targets that won't result in a sale or a job, right? Maybe you go in and you hate it and you don't like the people, or you heard bad things, right? It's just as important to kind of filter out the companies and know why you're filtering them out, to just help you kind of make the correct decision kind of moving forward. But those are kind of my thoughts. I mean, anything else that you think, Ryan, that kind of applies to, more kind of analyzing those numbers as it goes to our job search?
Totally. I think in this case, when you're thinking like a salesperson, it's just a way for you to elevate the way you're networking, right? It's a way for you to think more strategically, even more tactically in a sense, right? Having a better sense of organizing the contacts that you have and creating a system to reach out to them and revisit things. So that's why we say think like a salesperson, because the same type of steps that salespeople take in order to seal a deal, that's exactly what you want to be doing when you are job seeking as well.
Exactly.
All right, so let's get into the next slide, Don. What a target companies list even is. So this is really going to be the meat of today's discussion. And this is something that Don and I recently wrote an article about as well. So we'll link that in the comments of this webinar later. But a target companies list, what is it? This is a living, breathing, working document that you're going to use to help keep track of organizations, companies, or opportunities that you've identified as being a potential fit for your next employer. So this list that you're going to use is going to comprise of companies that make practical sense, as well as maybe that are some of, a bit more unconventional or really exciting to you as an individual. So these could be places that, you have found interesting because maybe they align really well with your skill set, or you're known for having a really great culture, or maybe because it's a mission that you really believe in, but whatever the cause is or whatever those thoughts are, these are companies that you've identified as a potential fit for your next employer. So they're totally worth exploring.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll go into even more detail about like how to build out this list and, in a few minutes here. But, what we've also included, which we'll show kind of down the line, is actually, a list, kind of a template of a list that you can kind of create. But there are also a lot of tools out there online that, allow you to kind of manage this information. So, but at the basics, Ryan's absolutely right. The basics is it's a list of companies that you might or might not be interested in. And kind of going into that too, like, why should I create a target companies list? I think that the biggest thing about it is, as we've talked about, like, kind of that, methodical approach and, keeping track of things. But I know when I do stuff, I don't know about you, Ryan, I'm always like, that's something that I'll remember, right? Mm-hmm. I'm in the moment and I'm like in an interview, or I see a job description, or someone's told me at a party that I should reach out about their company. Like, I was like, okay, I'll remember that's an important piece of information. I'll put it in my brain, and that's going to be something that I'll remember definitely tomorrow, right? And as we all know,
it slips our mind.
It slips out of our mind, right?
Yeah.
So, I think that's the biggest reason. It's a lot of different pieces of information that you just have to put in one area, because job searching is overwhelming and time consuming. Right. So, we're not going to remember all those things, especially if, we may be in a situation where we're looking for a job over, a period of months, to remember what something happened months ago, like, is not going to be as easy if you don't have it in one place. So another kind of aspect to that is kind of with the time consuming part of it, as we all know, like, if you're lucky enough to have always been offered a job with never going on a job search, good for you, but most of us don't work that way. Job searching itself can be time consuming just from the act of doing it, right? And I mean, like, going on and applying to jobs on LinkedIn or different kind of job boards. Like, it's so time consuming to get all that stuff in that you shouldn't I know that what I've done and what you shouldn't do is get kind of lazy with it and look for shortcuts, right? Like, kind of copy and pasting like a cover letter or, your just kind of general application into as many jobs as you can in like an hour window, and then be done with it and go watch TV and hopefully something will stick. Like, as we all know, that's probably not the best approach. You should be dedicating yourself to applying to jobs and companies that you believe are a good fit for you. And you should, instead of applying to 5 companies kind of randomly but quickly, should take the same amount of time and apply it to one, right? So how are you going to identify that one? Ideally with kind of a target companies list. And, kind of the last point on here, and that kind of focus, as I kind of mentioned, it's about streamlining your job search, right? By narrowing down the companies that you're interested in, which allows you to track better opportunities, strategically network, and we'll go into that as well. But, ultimately get your resume in front of the right people. It's not just about job applications. It's also about, okay, this company's on my list. Who do I know there? Who are my LinkedIn connections? Who do I know that knows someone there that could make an intro? There's a lot of kind of areas as to why.
Absolutely. And I think too, like when you're job searching, whether you're in a job or not, this is something that's, takes up a ton of your time. Sometimes it can be your full-time job being, on the market and looking for your next opportunity. So you want to think about things as how can I make this the most efficient process possible by still getting the most out of it? And we believe by creating a target companies list is exactly how you go about that. It's a great way to stay organized. It's a great way to keep track of things, to help with, the time consuming aspects. And basically, like we mentioned before, this is a living, breathing document that's going to stay with you during your entire search, and really help, make things more efficient.
Yeah. And to that point, like not only does it stay with you for your entire search, like this could stay with you for your next search too,
Absolutely.
right? If you find a new job 3 years down the line, it's time to move again for whatever reason, like you can go back to something and remember conversations or interviews that you had years ago, right? Which is why it's that much more important that this list isn't just a list of companies' names, but it's also additional details and information, like the fact that you went on an interview, who did you meet at that interview, a variety of things. And we'll kind of show you that, how we imagine kind of the most important information to track. But Ryan, I'll let you take it.
Yeah. So how to create a target companies list. This is kind of getting into some of the nitty gritty that Don and I have touched on a little bit earlier in this presentation, but this should be a template that you're using and working with to really organize your job search. So we suggest using software like Excel or Google Sheets or Apple Numbers to help kind of keep track of things and create various columns to capture important information like location. If it's a company you're interested in, does it even make sense location-wise based on where they are? Put the company website in there, connections from your network so that you know who to reach out to that can maybe make an introduction at these companies that you're interested in. And obviously links to their career website too. So Don and I actually created a template that we want to share with you guys, and it's available for free to download. So we'll also link this later too, but Don will pull that up right now. And as you can see, once it loads, there's some various columns in here, and these are things that you can edit, put in, important information. I think, Don, you put in some examples there if you want to walk through it.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, these are the pieces of information that we think are valuable information to track. But of course, you can add additional info or, not use any of this, right? It's meant to be what's best for you. But again, this is a nice template that, is free and available that, could make sense. So kind of going through it kind of one by one, and I hope, hopefully you can kind of see it, but if you get your hands on the template itself, you can explore it in more detail. Obviously, this first column is just the company, right? Pretty basic, something that you've identified as a potential fit in variety, for any variety of reasons. And we'll go into what could make up those companies, but, basic company info, right? Also keep the company website in there. It's more than likely they'll have a website, easy access to information. The next is we put status. This is a drop-down bar, and I think this is kind of what I was getting at before. But what has happened with you considering this company, right? Have you taken, if you we've listed kind of a few obvious steps, but, either you haven't taken any action, applied online, reached out to contacts, or even getting to like phone interviews, on-site interviews, hopefully offer stage, things like that. And then you can also set up filters to kind of manage, stuff that you need to do or stuff that you're actively involved in. If you have 6 or 7 interview processes, it's going to get kind of confusing, and you want to track that information appropriately. This other part that we included, job alerts. So most companies, especially larger organizations, have job alerts features on their careers page, which you can sign up for an email, email alerts essentially of when new positions come up. Usually you can also filter those by like the kind of opportunity that it is, whether it's, you're an accountant or a software developer or anything like that. You can make sure that, the job openings that are available, are directed in those methods. So I would always suggest, signing up for those job alerts. You can put them, into a filter or a folder on your email so you're not getting constantly bombarded. But, you're going to want to know when a position becomes available because, the average turnaround time for an open position, right, depending on the role in the company, it might only be 3 to 4 weeks before they open the job, have 5 or 6 candidates that they want to interview and eventually offer one of them. And you want to make sure that you're involved in that and know when that's available, right? So obviously very important. But not all companies do, which is why we have both kind of company career page and LinkedIn career page sections here, which you can choose to add. I know that may seem silly, but sometimes companies post to LinkedIn and not their own career page, or vice versa. So you're going to want to kind of keep an eye on those, especially the companies that you're most interested in. The rest of this stuff is more about kind of the, regarding the stuff that you've done, or some facts beyond just what you see on a job board, right? It's the, jobs that you've actually applied for is a good way to track, but also your contacts within the organization. And these can be people that you've met throughout the application and interview process, or people that that you want to reach out to, friends or friends of friends or things like that. And always, obviously, at the very end, a little note section. But so we think this is nice because it, kind of hits everything and has a lot of fun drop downs. And I spent a lot of time doing it myself, so you can download it.
So please download it.
Yeah, please download it. But again, it's pretty straightforward. You can kind of do it at anything. I think there are some other, maybe even like, stuff that you pay for. There's a lot of variations of this, but I don't think that whichever one you use, it doesn't take away from the core concept of tracking your job search, more methodically and, intelligently.
Absolutely. Great.
Okay.
All right. So we know the how between, the why and the how right now between starting your target companies list. And once you do, where do you start? So I'll drop it over to you, Don, really quick to walk us through this. And then maybe we can just bounce some ideas back and forth off of each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the biggest thing about, sitting down to identify is like kind of, if you sit down to do it, like, where do I even start? Like, it's a big world out there with lots of different companies and how you can kind of fit. So we've kind of developed this list of kind of like individual kind of thought topics. So we kind of challenge you to try to come up with at least like 10 for every single topic if you're really serious about your job search. The first one is obviously competitors, right? This is the most obvious, right? Your competitors do the same thing that you're likely doing now, whether you're in sales or accounting or software development or marketing or HR, like, that your competitors in one way or another are really going to value the skill set that you've built up because you're at a competitor yourself. So, challenge yourself to write down kind of all the competitors that you can identify. Sometimes you may know these because you're just talking about them in your day-to-day job. Other times you might have to look them up, right? I don't know every recruitment firm in Chicago. I have a good idea, but like a little bit of research actually shows that there's quite a bit more in some competitors that I didn't even know were my competition. So, that's obviously the most obvious because of the transferability of your skill set is pretty clear. But you will have to do some research to find out who your exact kind of competitors, are. But I think that kind of leads nicely into the next one, though, right?
Absolutely, it does. So outside of competitors, right, like Don said, this is kind of like, you're going to know some of these things. When we're thinking about the next step, it's industry. So this is getting outside of just the competitors. And we want you to think of like, what vendors does my company work with? What clients do we work with? What suppliers do we work with? And kind of thinking outside of the box where you may be in the same industry, but not exactly doing the same work. And your skill sets will probably be valued by those types of companies too. So we suggest doing a bit of research, and either a quick, LinkedIn search or Google search would be a great place to start to see what other companies are in the same industry, but maybe not doing the exact same type of work that your current company does.
Yeah, and just like kind of competitors, you're probably talking about these companies in your day-to-day job, right?
Absolutely.
Like, as Ryan mentioned, who are your clients, but, who's your software vendor, right? Like, they might need something, they know, it's the same thing. So, again, research needs to be done, but definitely stuff that, you can even just look in your day-to-day and probably pull out a few names kind of from that perspective.
Totally.
Location is obviously the next thing. And, this is probably the most interesting topic for the last 3 months and what we have seen as recruiters. But, when we developed this probably 3 months ago, location was obvious, right? If you're in a city, right, you probably want to limit your jobs to what's commutable for you, whether that be the city or surrounding suburbs, based on public transportation or your own transportation, right? Pretty obvious, right? And there's, especially if you're in smaller, areas or rural areas, like your options probably are a little bit less in terms of the number of employers, but it's also possible that those employers are a little bit more open to people with maybe not the right backgrounds because of the candidate pool that exists in that area. What we've seen as recruiters in the last 3 months, clients and companies are getting very comfortable with remote work because they have to, especially ones that maybe weren't, interested in going that route, previously. They're forced into it. And I think it took 1 or 2 months for companies to really get comfortable with it as they moved all their staff remotely and, had to make sure that people are still being efficient and proactive and productive, but also making sure that everyone has a laptop, right? There was a lot of work that kind of went into it, but we're 3 months, almost going on 4 months into this COVID-19 situation, and a lot of companies are still remote. So a lot that has opened it up, and I know that we've placed at Hirewell a lot of people into Chicago-based clients that don't live in Chicago and never will, right? I just in the past 3 weeks, I placed someone from California and someone from Minneapolis, Minnesota, that will never move, right? But they're in Chicago jobs because the jobs can be 100% remote moving forward. And that's really kind of opened things up. I don't know if you've seen anything like that with your,
yeah, I think in the sense of maybe not necessarily with the clients that we're partnered with, but with the candidates that I have in my network, location, if we talked about this a few months ago, like you mentioned, folks were only considering, their local communities for jobs. And now people are looking all across the US and sometimes internationally too. So due to COVID, we have seen a huge increase in people kind of considering 100% remote opportunities. Less travel is involved for a lot of folks now too. So there's not really that component of considering, hey, is this going to be a commutable distance for me? So location has definitely shifted in terms of, if we spoke about this at the beginning of the year, we might have said, hey, make sure that you can get to and from work every day. And now that the job market has just shifted quite, severely in that case. But I think in my opinion, for the better, definitely, you're allowed to kind of exercise more opportunities that maybe you couldn't have before.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing to think about though is still time zones. If you're in San Francisco, you might not want to wake up at 5 a.m. to start your
Great point, Don.
Right.
Great point. Yeah.
Thing to keep in mind, right?
Totally.
Cool. We want to take the next one.
Yeah. So the best of list, this is my favorite, to be honest, because I feel like a lot of people utilize these. And if you are a millennial looking for, the best company to work for in the Midwest, there's probably a list that's already created about that, as well as a million other best of lists too. So, organizations like Glassdoor and Forbes, Cranes, Built in Chicago, they have a ton of these best of lists. So we suggest taking a look at those and seeing what companies pique your interest in that sense, maybe the ones that align in terms of their mission or their culture or, whatever it may be. We suggest taking a look at these lists because they're already created. They're there for you. So why not utilize them? And a lot of the organizations that I mentioned, like Forbes and Built in, they sometimes share the open opportunities at these companies too. So you have a platform already where the list is created for you. You can take a look at the openings. Why not do that and take advantage of it? Yeah,
no, it makes sense. And it's, there's so many companies or, online publications that do that, it's such an easy resource to tap into.
Absolutely.
The next is kind of your network, right? Obviously, this is probably, if you're talking job searching, then if you say, I'm looking for a job, the next words you hear, well, you should tap into your network, right? Network is probably the most overused word in job searching, but it's correct, right? Our network is a very powerful and important thing. And, sometimes people don't realize how deep it actually goes when you think about it. So, your network is not just people you've used to work with, right? It's, it's clients if you're, companies related to your company. It's, friends, it's family, it's, it's a variety of different kinds of, any kind of relationship that you have composes your network, right? And I think when you start to think about your expanded network and your friends of friends and your parents' friends and your aunts and uncles' friends, like it's actually quite huge. So, and I think another thing, like when you're talking to your network and asking about your network, you're not asking them for a lot, right? It's usually something like an introduction or a little bit of advice. And if they're in your network, 99% of the people are going to be happy to give it. So you shouldn't be shy to reach out to people, especially if they're in your network and you think, well, that's a friend. I don't want to ask them about job advice, right? That's not a relationship. Like, that's okay. And I think you'll be surprised at how many people in your network actually would be happy to help out, should the situation arise.
Yeah, that's great advice, Don. We always suggest reaching out to your network, having the conversation, even asking for some advice if you're not asking for an introduction is a great way to get some more information about companies you may be interested in. To kind of go off of that, your peer group. So these are going to be folks that aren't in your direct network. Depending on the size of the company you work at, these could be people that work at your company that maybe you've never had an interaction with. But more likely than not, they're people that have, a similar educational background as you, a similar skill set. If you do a quick search on LinkedIn, maybe based on job title, you'll be able to see the moves that people in your peer group have made. So other companies that they've joined, maybe companies they worked at before the one that they're at. So take a look at those and get some ideas and do a little bit of research on those organizations too.
Yeah, absolutely. This next one I find kind of fun to think about, but like, it's essentially the stuff that you love, right? Hobbies, interests, and passions. So like, it might not seem obvious, but your hobbies, interests, and passions have companies and organizations behind that probably, right? So whether it's television or music or like, those are kind of some of the obvious ones, but like thinking if you're into fitness, there's a lot of fitness companies or clothing brands or fitness equipment, like or I don't know, running or skiing. And, I think sports, music, and television, because those are the things I'm interested in. But, Ryan, I don't know if you have any other examples of just kind of things that are outside the box when it comes to things that you
Sure. I think even things like travel, right? There's a ton of organizations that are a part of the travel industry that maybe you wouldn't think of off the bat, but could be great places to explore if that's a place that you want to kind of marry your professional and personal passions together.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what's interesting about those companies is that, those organizations, if you have those, if you're interested in that company because it's a passion or interest of yours, it's probably filled with people that also have similar passions and interests, and that's how they found the organization as well. So, that's something that you want to, that's something that you could share with a potential employer, and you may have more of a shot than you think, even if it's kind of outside of your, comfort zone, right? In terms of industry or kind of job performance.
Absolutely. And the last thought here is alumni networks. So I think off the bat, a lot of people think of alumni networks as places for, recent college graduates or upcoming college graduates to kind of jumpstart their career search. And while that's true and something we totally suggest taking advantage of if, you've recently graduated from college, it's also a great resource for folks that are already in the workforce. So we suggest reaching back out to that university or college career center and asking if there's, any organizations with the alumni groups that you can join. Do they have any suggestions for networking? Or maybe there's a local chapter in the city that you live in that you can, be a part of and start networking in that sense too.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to kind of, surmise about these, right? If you were to challenge yourself to, identify 10 companies for each of these 8 categories, you're going to come up with a list of 80 potential employers that are, essentially, as we call in sales, a warm lead, right? There's something about that is going to be worth exploring. So if you were to do that and put those on your list, that's a lot of work to be done. And that's a lot of job applications and job alerts to sign up to and LinkedIn connections to make. That's your, if you're starting a job search, coming up with 10 companies for each of these categories, adding them to your list, and then attacking them one by one. That's a lot of work, but that's, positive steps in the direction of finding your next job.
Totally. So I'm going to toss it over right now to a couple comments and questions that we've received during the webinar. So if you have any questions at this time, feel free to reach out. But Lisa had asked a question and she posed it as, there's a ton of companies out there. How do I find ones that would be a good fit for me? Maybe there's a small company no one knows of that would be perfect. So Lisa, we talked a lot about how to kind of identify companies during this. And, I think when you're looking at something small, these are like the challenges that we would suggest you go about, right? Like look at competitors, maybe the organization you work at right now, or that best of list might be a really great place to get started. The best small businesses in Chicago to work for, something like that. But all of this is going to require some research and some time on your end. And so I think thinking about industry, location, all of those things are going to be important factors to consider when you do that. Next is Monica. She asked when and where the customized job search spreadsheet would be posted to download. So Don, you have one person that's totally stoked about getting this spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Monica, we're gonna add it into the comment section of this webinar. So we'll have it there. I'll tag you in it so you can download it. It's also going to be on our Hirewell website too. All right. Somebody else had asked a question. Asking about things being affected due to the current pandemic. So she extended a master's program for a semester and hoping that things fall into the right place. So if you want to talk a little bit further about that, and maybe you're asking more specifically about your job search, feel free to message Don or myself after this, and we'd be happy to talk to you offline about that.
Yeah, and Ryan, I think that is a good point though. Like when you are with the global pandemic, I think you do want to think about the industries that are most affected by it. For instance, unfortunately, things like travel and hospitality are having a really hard time right now, right?
Absolutely.
So, as far as hiring goes, like they're probably not. So if you're in that industry, maybe a good time to stay put, or not saying that, it's definitely not an industry that's going away, but like you want to be, apprised of the current situation. So those are definitely things you want to think about.
Yeah, great suggestion, Don, for sure. So it looks like that's all the questions we have for today. Again, if anybody has any other questions, want to follow up with Don or myself offline, we would be happy to schedule some time to chat with you. If we can answer it quickly on LinkedIn, we'd be happy to do that too. But thank you everybody for joining today. Don, thanks so much for joining me on the webinar and providing your insights on this. It was great to have you. We're going to have all of this content posted on the Hirewell website. So that's still coming soon. Hang tight. Hopefully by the end of summer, we'll have that fully launched for you, but you can access it now. So I'll include that in the comment section of these webinars too. So feel free to circle back on that. Again, thanks everybody for your questions, for your time, and we'll see everybody soon. Any last thoughts, Don?
No, that's it. Thanks for doing this, Ryan. This is great.
Awesome. Thanks, Don. I appreciate it. All right, everybody, have a good rest of your week. We'll talk to you soon.